I tried going to medical detox so many times, a young man whispered, his body shivering violently against the freezing coastal dampness of the Pacific Northwest. It's absolute hell. You throw up constantly, your skin flashes from burning hot to freezing cold, and your muscles ache so intensely that you literally cannot stand on your own 2 feet. So you wake up on the concrete, your last few dollars are gone, and you're forced to run around the block just to scrape together enough cash to survive the next 12 hours. You can't depend on friends out here. Everyone is carrying massive, crushing problems of their own. Imagine walking down a busy metropolitan street to grab your morning coffee. To your left, a gleaming, multi-billion-dollar corporate tech headquarters stretches into the clouds, representing unimaginable global wealth. To your right, a human being is slumped against a concrete planter, completely unresponsive, while hundreds of pedestrians simply step directly over their body without breaking stride or pausing their conversations. Welcome to Seattle, Washington, the Emerald City. For decades, this metropolis was celebrated across the globe as the glittering jewel of innovation, progressive values, and natural beauty. But today, within an urban landscape covering just over 200 square miles, a terrifying new normal has taken root. Absolute poverty, the rapid proliferation of low-cost synthetic substances, and constant, highly visible human suffering have simply become an accepted part of the daily workplace commute. How does one of the wealthiest, most technologically advanced cities on the planet learn to look directly at a humanitarian collapse and accept it as a routine feature of daily life? Welcome to Homeless U.S. News. Today, we are tearing away the polite, progressive facade of Seattle. We are bypassing the sanitized political statements to explore the catastrophic breakdown of the housing market, the devastating reality of the synthetic epidemic, and the deep institutional paralysis that allowed a human crisis to be treated as a permanent lifestyle. If you believe that human lives should never be hidden for the sake of corporate optics, smash that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. Let's walk through the rain together. Drop a comment below right now. How does it feel to see extreme destitution existing just steps away from the wealthiest corporations on Earth? Let's uncover the truth. Part 1. The normalization of the cracks. Seattle's metropolitan facade. In one of the most affluent urban centers in the United States, a territory overflowing with venture capital and international enterprises, a stunningly separate reality has established itself directly on the asphalt. In Seattle, the sheer density and visibility of extreme poverty and substance dependency have drawn sharp, nationwide concern. High-profile observers have repeatedly pointed to the region's leadership, heavily questioning how a major American metropolis has allowed this emergency to expand so profoundly over the past few years. But what specific structural breakdowns lie behind a disaster that seems mathematically impossible to resolve within a wealthy society? Why do ordinary working-class individuals end up surviving inside rusted vehicles and nylon shelters after just a few short months of financial bad luck? To understand the reality of Seattle today, you have to look directly at the mathematical acceleration of displacement. The data confirms that the unhoused population has risen to historic levels. In recent tracking periods, the city officially recorded thousands of individuals experiencing absolute homelessness, a number that has violently climbed to nearly 20,000 people. Specifically, 19,834 individuals, according to the latest official point-in-time counts. At the exact same time, the widespread, unregulated availability of highly potent street substances has dramatically worsened the survival conditions on the ground, aggressively accelerating both the rate of dependency and the level of street-level public distress. Certain commercial corridors of the city have been transformed into unmanaged landscapes of displacement, where vulnerable individuals experiencing acute physical and psychological trauma are left to survive in full public view. Tearing nylon shelters are pitched directly against downtown storefront windows, serving as the only thin layer of protection against the biting coastal elements. This environment has fundamentally altered the psychological fabric of the metropolis. The sheer frequency of these scenes has created a dark subculture of numbness. What was once deeply shocking to the conscience of the public has now been integrated into the routine daily rhythm of the city. Housed residents, small business operators, and municipal authorities have grown accustomed to scenes of profound human misery that would have been completely unthinkable a decade ago, proving that when an economy becomes entirely exclusive, extreme poverty becomes a normalized feature of the urban terrain. Part 2. The housing trap and the mechanics of displacement. The devastating crisis of human displacement across Seattle is not the result of a single personal failure or an isolated economic shift. It is the structural outcome of a massive, compounding combination of real estate hyperinflation, catastrophic gaps in the public health system, and long-standing policy limitations that have intentionally intensified over time. First and foremost, the complete collapse of the affordable housing market remains the absolute primary driver, pushing families and workers off the cliff and onto the pavement. The financial barrier to securing basic shelter has become an impossible mountain for the working class to climb. In Seattle today, a modest 200-square-foot studio apartment commands rental prices that require an applicant to document gross income equivalent to 3 times the monthly rent just to pass automated screening systems. We are not talking about high-end luxury properties. We are talking about older units facing severe maintenance decay. Over the past decade, the baseline cost of a roof has risen exponentially, moving at a velocity that has completely decoupled it from the stagnant wages of service laborers, hospitality staff, and retail workers. When a landlord implements a sudden, massive rent increase, a family can go from stability to absolute housing insecurity in a matter of days. This structural eviction is the direct reason why long, unbroken lines of dilapidated, unpowered RVs and camper vans are now parked on nearly every industrial side road and suburban perimeter of the city. The deep economic inequality across the region has severely widened. While the technology-driven economy generates immense wealth, that capital remains concentrated at the absolute top, leaving thousands of essential manual laborers and gig economy workers in a state of extreme financial fragility. They're working full-time hours to maintain the city's infrastructure, yet they possess zero financial cushion. A sudden corporate layoff, a broken car transmission, or a single unexpected medical diagnosis is all it takes to push a working citizen out of their apartment and into a vehicle, forcing them to calculate their survival one night at a time. Part 3. The self-feeding loop, trapped on the sidewalk. In addition to the crushing weight of the real estate crisis, the massive influx of cheap, hyperpotent synthetic substances has acted as a violent multiplier of street-level trauma. Because these modern chemical compounds are incredibly low cost to manufacture and terrifyingly accessible on the street, dependency spreads rapidly among populations that are already living in highly unstable, traumatized conditions. As a direct result, absolute housing loss and chemical distress become tightly, inextricably intertwined within a self-feeding loop. This loop operates with predatory efficiency. A severe dependency frequently leads directly to job loss, credit destruction, and rapid eviction from traditional housing. Conversely, the sheer, unimaginable trauma of forced survival on the freezing streets, enduring constant sleep deprivation, public humiliation, and the threat of physical assault make psychological recovery and long-term sobriety increasingly difficult to achieve outside a controlled medical environment. Over months and years, a self-reinforcing cycle of despair is constructed, securely trapping highly vulnerable human beings in a permanent state of chronic homelessness. This physical crisis is severely complicated by the absolute collapse of the behavioral health safety net. Untreated psychiatric conditions play a fundamental, undeniable role in the tragedy of Seattle streets. A massive percentage of the unsheltered population survives with deep, complex post-traumatic stress disorders, severe clinical depression, or active psychosis. However, actual access to consistent, long-term psychiatric care, rehabilitation facilities, and mental health counseling remains tragically limited for those without insurance or a fixed address. Without a stable sanctuary to protect medications and clear the mind, psychological symptoms inevitably worsen. Paranoia increases, reality fractures, and social reintegration becomes an impossible mountain to climb, leaving vulnerable minds to endure their internal storms on a wet concrete sidewalk. Part 4. The pendulum of management, policy versus civic space. Faced with rapidly growing public frustration, commercial strain, and intense political friction, the local administration of Seattle has been repeatedly forced to adjust its approach to the visible crisis. For years, the city heavily relied on progressive social support models that strictly prioritized subsidized housing vouchers, flexible community outreach, and broad harm reduction strategies. However, as the actual physical conditions on the sidewalks visibly deteriorated and encampments expanded across public parks, these permissive measures began to reveal severe structural limitations. Under crushing public pressure and national scrutiny, municipal leadership attempted to implement a significantly tougher stance, particularly within the downtown commercial zones most heavily impacted by open distress and property crime. Consequently, local law enforcement was directed to take on a much more visible, active role in public space management. Stricter directives encouraged the intervention against open substance use in designated public areas, with the explicit goal of disrupting street-level criminal elements and restoring basic civic order across the business corridors. However, this shifting political pendulum demonstrates the profound fragmentation of the city's overall response. While increased police oversight attempts to manage the visible symptoms of poverty by clearing tents from commercial storefronts, the underfunded social programs struggle to provide anywhere for these displaced human beings to go. Encampments are regularly cleared by city crews without any permanent, long-term housing units actually available for the residents. As a direct result, violent displacement occurs without any actual resolution. The trauma is simply shuffled from one city block to another, and the tents reappear in nearby residential neighborhoods within a week. The central, unresolved question looming over Seattle is whether these opposing forces of enforcement and compassion can ever work together, or whether they will remain in constant, expensive tension, offering nothing but temporary containment rather than a genuine cure for the community. Part 5. The stretched thread, the social welfare illusion. Long-term, permanent resolution of the Seattle crisis will undoubtedly require deep, structural reform that goes far beyond street-level interventions. Sociologists and public health experts point directly to the vital necessity of a unified strategy connecting the housing sector, the healthcare system, and public safety infrastructure. Without this level of coordination, even the most well-funded municipal programs risk operating in complete isolation, wasting millions of taxpayer dollars while the safety net continues to fray. At a surface glance, Seattle appears to possess a highly robust, comprehensive social welfare system. Programs such as federal Social Security, supplemental security income, disability benefits, food assistance, and housing vouchers are explicitly designed to serve as an impenetrable barrier against absolute poverty. In economic theory, These multi-billion-dollar state systems should prevent any citizen from falling onto the concrete. In harsh reality, however, their protective capacity has been completely destroyed by the hyperinflation of the local market. The central issue is the unbridgeable gap between fixed government benefit payouts and the astronomical cost of living in the Pacific Northwest. Stagnant incomes from SSI or disability assistance were simply never engineered to sustain a human life in a city driven by high-end tech capital. Furthermore, actually accessing these vital benefits is a bureaucratic nightmare for someone surviving on a sidewalk. Lacking state-issued identification, a permanent mailing address, or consistent internet access turns the application and renewal process into an impossible obstacle for individuals actively struggling with deep trauma or cognitive challenges. The social safety net acts less like a secure trampoline to lift people up and much more like a fragile, fraying thread that merely prevents immediate fatal collapse without ever restoring our neighbors to stable, solid ground. Part 6. The Pressurized Core. Seattle's Impact on the Nation. When comparing the homelessness crisis in Seattle with the broader situation across the United States, several highly distinct, crucial key differences stand out clearly. Although extreme poverty is a national emergency, Seattle's experience is uniquely condensed, vastly more visible, and much more deeply integrated into the everyday, routine urban terrain than in almost any other major American city. First, Seattle possesses a disproportionately high concentration of unhoused individuals relative to its actual geographic size. In many other regions of the country, poverty is spread across massive suburban sprawl or hidden in remote rural sectors, remaining largely invisible to the wealthy public. In sharp contrast, Seattle's displaced population is densely compressed within a compact, bustling downtown core. This geographic reality forces the tents, the vehicles, and the public suffering directly into the daily path of thousands of commuters, making the crisis an omnipresent feature of city life. Another critical distinction is the exceptionally high percentage of individuals living completely unsheltered. While other major U.S. cities utilize strict public camping bans, forced relocation, or a higher volume of emergency indoor beds to limit the visual presence of destitution, Seattle has historically prioritized flexible progressive outreach. Combined with a relatively mild, albeit incredibly wet, Pacific Northwest climate that allows outdoor survival year-round, extreme homelessness here has become long-term, structural, and less seasonal. The city tragically represents a pressurized version of multiple national failures. The catastrophic collapse of housing affordability, the failure of the behavioral healthcare infrastructure, and the synthetic substance epidemic are all violently unfolding right here, in plain view on the wet pavement. Outro, the mirror of the rain. The devastating crisis of human displacement in Seattle is not the result of a single failed policy or an isolated political decision. It is the tragic, inevitable outcome of years of accumulated structural pressure bubbling to the surface. The direct collision between aggressively rising housing costs, deeply untreated human trauma, fragile social systems, and paralyzed political action. The synthetic epidemic did not create this societal fracture, but it violently accelerated it, exposing the systemic weaknesses baked into the very foundation of the city. But what makes Seattle truly unsettling today is not just the massive scale of the suffering on the streets. It is exactly how thoroughly normalized its suffering has become to the housed public. The sight of tearing tents, rusted vehicles, and human beings in acute distress no longer shocks the conscience of the daily commuter. These tragedies have simply become part of the accepted background noise of urban life. And when a wealthy, advanced society begins to actively accept a humanitarian emergency as a normal condition of existence, genuine recovery becomes infinitely more difficult to achieve. Real, lasting change requires vastly more than cosmetic street sweeps, temporary band-aids, or shifting political blame. It demands honest accountability, massive long-term investment in permanent supportive housing, and the moral courage to confront the uncomfortable truths of our modern economy. Because the ultimate question is no longer whether Seattle is in deep trouble. The only question that matters now is whether we, as a society, are finally willing to stop walking past the suffering and looking the other way. Now, we turn the conversation over to you. Do you believe that strict law enforcement is necessary to clean up the streets, or does the solution lie entirely in providing permanent housing and integrated medical care? Have you witnessed the normalization of extreme poverty within your own hometown? Please, leave your thoughts, your frustrations, and your ideas in the comment section below. We read every single perspective, and your voice is a critical part of demanding a real solution. If this deep, investigative journey opened your eyes to the true reality of the Emerald City, please take a quick second to hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it signals to the algorithm that human-centered journalism matters, helping this video reach a much wider audience who need to see the truth. And most importantly, if you want to keep walking alongside us through the hidden corners of America and giving a powerful voice to those who have been silenced in the shadows, please subscribe to Homeless US News and hit the notification bell so you absolutely never miss an upload. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, stay compassionate, look out for your neighbors, and we will see you in the next story on Homeless US News.